No, I'm Les Green. I chair the entrepreneurship group at WCIT, the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. And I'm pleased to host our event where tonight we're going to be looking at the current trends affecting the sports tech industry. Now, I'm sure like me, during 2021, you've seen some incredible sporting activities on TV. We had the near miss by England in the European Football Championships, although we'll probably skip over that quite quickly. The fantastic performances at the Tokyo Olympics, and of course, the brilliant work by Emma Raducanu just a few months ago at the US Open. But of course, all these sports and many more do rely on technology, not just to bring out the best in those taking part, but also to make matters so much more interesting for all of us watching the action. So during the next 90 minutes or so, and with the help of our 4 experts, we're going to have the opportunity not only to hear their views, but to ask questions of them. And we're going to be covering quite a wide range of topics, from the rapidly changing face of broadcast to improving the performance of elite athletes, the introduction, would you believe, of electric race planes, and through to the gamification of extreme sports. So quite a lot of topics we're going to go through. But this is the whole point about sports tech. It is a very broad church. Now, actually, I think we're going to be demonstrating the power of communications too as well tonight, because our keynote speaker, Alistair Waddington, he's in sunny Wiltshire, or not so sunny from what I understand. Then we got Justin Page, who's in Los Angeles. We got Jeff Zaltman in Barcelona, and Mike Mortimer's in Denver. So that's a truly international gathering, if ever there was one. Personally, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Phil Jones. He's on the call tonight. I'm going to embarrass him now, because obviously without all of his help, we just don't make this Growth Tech event happen. I'm sure you've all been chased many times by him over the last few days and weeks, but obviously without his sterling efforts, we just couldn't have an event. So thanks again, Phil. It's much appreciated. 4th point is tonight is free to attend, as you know. You will have been sent details previously about the donations to WCIT charities. And then last but not least, there will be some of you not that familiar with what we do within livery companies, obviously such as the Worshipful Company of Information Technologies. So I thought it would be very helpful to have our current master, that's Alistair Fulton, just provide us with a brief overview of why we exist and what are our main objectives. So Alistair, if you don't mind, I'm going to hand over to you for a brief update. Many thanks.
Okay, good evening. Could somebody wave at me to show that you can hear me? Well done, thank you. Well, good evening. Can I add my welcome to that of Les, and embarrass Les because I know how much work he has put in on this, as well as Phil. So well done to 2 of you. Just a general bit about livery companies. I know we've got quite a few members of our company here, and also members of other companies, but I believe quite a few of you are not members of the livery. Livery companies are creatures that are unique to the City of London. The oldest among them was formed before the Norman Conquest, and nowadays there are 110 livery companies, with a few more guilds who are on the slippery slope to becoming liveries. Livery companies originally became involved in educating apprentices, regulating their trade, protecting consumers with early trading standards, including inspection and enforcement, the election of the sheriffs of London, and approval of candidates for the office of Lord Mayor. Their role as an electoral body is one they continue as part of the City of London's governance today. In modern times, the livery companies continue to thrive and remain relevant, primarily as charitable and educational institutions, and contrary to widely held belief, most still retain strong and substantial links with their profession, craft, or trade. Some companies still have regulatory and inspection roles. The goldsmiths and the gun makers are but 2 examples among many. Any thoughts that the livery companies are quaint and archaic relics with no modern role should be discarded immediately. The livery companies are in rude health, and most remain immensely active and influential in their respective spheres. So with respect to the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists, we are the 100th livery company, which is a fine digital number. We achieved our livery in 1992, and we now have over 750 members of our livery, amongst which nearly 400 are liverymen. We also have a hall. We are the only modern livery company to have a hall. We were awarded our Royal Charter in 2010. Together with the Mercers, we opened our very first brand new school, the Hammersmith Academy, and that was opened in 2011. We also have a cutter, which is a rowing barge on the Thames, and rather uniquely amongst all the livery companies, we have a ladies rowing team that can row their cutter up and down the Thames. We have an endowment fund to support charitable giving and activity. Over the last several years, we have given out some £4.5 million to various charitable activities. We also have strong links with the military, particularly with the Royal Signals, which is the IT and communications bit of the Army. HMS Collingwood, which is the training establishment for everything in the Navy, including comms and IT. 2 cadet groups, and we also have an affiliation with the Joint Forces Cyber Group, looking after security and safety within the internet. So I hope that has given a brief overview. We're very active and we're very keen on entrepreneurship in our livery. As most of you will know, most startups these days have a very high element of IT within them. Some of them it's 100% nowadays. So we're very keen to help small companies, particularly in our industry, to flourish. So I'm looking forward to this seminar myself. I'm sure it'll be very interesting, and thank you for listening to me, and over to you, Les.
Alistair, thanks very much indeed. That's really kind of you. Thanks for that. So without further ado, I think it's time for our first keynote speaker, Alistair Waddington. Alistair is Director of Sports at ITN. He's had over 30 years experience in the global sports and broadcast sector. And I know he's worked for many leading companies. I've known Alistair probably for about 10 years now. He consulted on the 2012 Paralympics and also the 2010 World Athletics Championships. And I believe ITN is now the largest independent sports production business in the world. So Alistair, over to you.
Good evening, and good evening, everyone. Les, I'm sorry to contradict you straight away, but I used to work for the largest sports production business in the world. And that was IMG. So as much as I'd like to take credit for ITN being it, I'm afraid we're not quite yet. Everyone, it's entirely appropriate that the setting for this evening's sessions online and remote. Despite the devastation of the pandemic and the unimaginable levels of disruption to our everyday lives, there have been many developments to fast track age-old debates, whether it's urban versus rural, work versus life balance, commute versus work from home. My apologies for dropping the first C-bomb of the night, but if COVID has indeed been a force in any part of our everyday lives, then virtual meetings and the technology that makes them possible, excuse the sports vernacular, have played a blinder. Television, in particular live television, has had to adapt, and to adapt really quickly. This wasn't just about the inconvenience of having to obey government guidelines or rules or whatever they called them. Companies like mine, ITN, were suddenly contractually on the hook. We were required to produce the same number of live news bulletins for our broadcast partners every day. None of our contracts had get out of jail free cards for unknown respiratory diseases. And as an international crisis, our viewers relied on the quality and the immediacy of the information that we were providing them with. So as I say, we had to adapt, and we had to adapt quickly. Jon Snow's presented Channel 4 News for more than 30 years, and for 29 or so of those years, he's done it from either the ITN studio in Gray's Inn Road or for some newsworthy trouble spot. Without COVID, we'd never have discovered that he could actually do this without a studio, without a broadcast camera setup, without a production team on the other side of the studio wall. In fact, all he needed was, guess what? A mobile phone. And who knew that a mobile phone could be controlled remotely? In fact, a particular Samsung phone, it turns out, can have the zoom and movement controlled by someone else working from their own kitchen. And then the nice iPhone people caught up and off we went. So we sent our on-screen talent a phone, a stand to put it on, and some rudimentary lighting to plug in, and the home studio was born. And complete with this, with their increasingly learned looking bookshelves and bookcase wallpaper or whatever, it turns out that the faces that we welcome into our homes every night now had homes of their own, and how we love to have a good snoop. So if you're Krishnan Gurumurthy, you can create the impression you're actually in the Channel 4 studio, wherever, of course, you'll realize that that's just a TV monitor with a picture of the Channel 4 studio in the background. And yes, I suspect Krish did do his own hair and makeup that night. Or if you're a Washington correspondent, you can put a subtly faded and out of focus picture of the White House on your sitting room wall, and bingo, your house is now a TV studio. So suddenly, work from home was a national requirement and then a national obsession. No longer was WFH an excuse for a Friday trip to the golf course. Now leisurely Sunday lunches could drag into Monday's hangover without the commute. We all talked about the new normal, which in the case of television turned out to be the old normal, but now without the reluctance of engineers to allow what they used to term unacceptably low technical standards. Will anyone ever again complain about the broadcast quality of a Zoom interview? I suspect that that myth has finally been busted. Well, put it another way, and I don't in any way diminish the human cost of the pandemic, but COVID could not have come at a better time for both news and sport, traditionally the backbone of live television production industry. In the ultimately risk-averse conservative world of live television, just don't make a mistake, up popped a confluence of technical development, needs must, and a newly discovered eagerness to think outside the box. In the years BC, before COVID, remote production had been increasingly discussed and experimented with. And in May 2019, we produced a 2-day event for World Athletics in Yokohama, Japan, from a production gallery in Sydney, Australia. Not only were our live pictures going out on Japanese network television in prime time, but we were also driving the big screens in the stadium remotely. So from the moment of capture by cameras, the images went on a round trip of 17,000 kilometers, only to magically reappear cut together in the stadiums live. And with just 4 frames of latency, the delay was imperceptible to the human eye. Not much point in watching the replay of the 4x100 relay in the stadium if it takes 4 minutes of delay to deliver it. So aside from winning some tech awards, the production was noteworthy for its sheer scale. 30 video paths, including the timing clocks, the graphics, augmented reality, and the ultra super slow-mo cameras were transported to Sydney. And then an additional 10 paths brought the content back to Japan. Throughout, all the content was handled as IP, from the moment it left the stadium to the moment it returned to Japan for distribution. As an aside, it was a slightly weird sensation standing beside the sound engineer in the Yokohama Stadium, watching the faders on his sound desk moving up and down without any intervention from him. The desk was being controlled in real time by someone in Sydney who he'd never met. But proof of the concept was there, and so were the nerves of senior executives. Could we guarantee it wouldn't fail? Well, no more than we could guarantee that the truck wouldn't break down on the way to the event. What we needed, though, were the financial and operational justifications for remote production. Cue COVID. It's worth noting that there are many definitions of remote production and nothing is yet truly remote. At its most sophisticated, remote production today involves bringing all the vision and audio chains back into a central control room and cutting the show remotely. At the very least, camera and sound operators are still on site, while the director, producer, vision mixer, replays, technical supervisors are back at base. One day, AI will allow for automated unmanned cameras in sports venues. We're close, but I, for one, am not yet convinced, as much of the intelligence stems from crowd noise and levels of fan support to prompt certain camera moves. Empty stadia or disproportionate imbalance between the two sets of fans can play havoc with the algorithms. And then, of course, there's the debate around commentary. I'm sympathetic to the view that it's impossible truly to gauge the live atmosphere without commentators, who incidentally do so much to bring events to life for viewers. But do we need them physically in the stadium? Well, I'm conscious that for many smaller events, viewers don't really care. But there is something inspiring about a live atmosphere and how it energizes commentators. And I'm not sure the world would ever have been treated to Kenneth Wolstenholme's "They think it's all over, it is now," if the commentary box had been in Salford rather than at Wembley Stadium. Remote production can be as simple as separation of camera and operator. The World Athletics Championships in Oregon next year, we don't have enough space in the stadium for cameras and operators, so we'll split them and have some of the operators with their pan, zoom handles, controls in the car park, and leave the camera lenses in the stadium. We could just as easily leave the operators at home, to be frank, thousands of miles from the lens they're controlling. But actually, we've suggested it to some broadcasters, but those nervous senior executives need more time. It's the age-old adage, if you don't make a decision, you can't make a bad one. COVID's brought into sharp focus some of the advantages of remote production: fewer people on the road, fewer expensive plane tickets, subsequent reduced carbon footprint, reduced hotel costs, better, people being allowed to go home to their families each night. But ultimately, the speed of adoption of remote production will be governed by the bean counters. If remote production is cheaper, good. If keeping people on the road in big trucks is cheaper, also good. And if you can produce live television for free, so much the better. So to the second C-bomb of the night, connectivity. Remote production is only possible with affordable, high quality, fully redundant connectivity. One would hope that telcos have learned a lesson from COVID, that affordable connectivity is not only possible, but vital to society as a whole, and selfishly to our industry in particular. Our Japan experiment was only viable because Telstra cut us a deal, because they too wanted a trial. So they can do it if they want to. But had we been saddled with the commercial prices of the day, with demands for 12-month minimum contracts for fibre for a 2-day event, the whole operation would have been hopelessly uneconomic. But with the development of 5G technologies, IP delivery and widespread laying of fibre, connectivity must surely come down in price, or so you'd think. We looked at doing next year's World Championships in Oregon as a full or partial remote production. And in the end, despite the space restrictions at the venue and the fact that we're flying quite a lot of stuff halfway around the world, we're doing everything on site. It's cheaper and it's more robust. Understandably, football, rugby and racing are the sports with the most consistent use of remote technology. They operate from the same venues year in, year out. And telcos see the value of investing in connectivity with a guarantee of returnable, consistent revenues. But many international sports federations are obliged to take their events to different venues. And in the next 24 months, we'll produce world-class athletics events in the US, China twice, Oman, Hungary, Serbia, Colombia, Australia. And whether we can produce them remotely depends entirely on the connectivity available locally. One final thought. There's no doubt that the advances in remote production techniques will fundamentally change the human side of our business. When I set out on this path some 35 years ago, the team spirit, the camaraderie of being on the road together was one of the driving factors that got me hooked. In Oregon next, we'll have some 400 people from all over the world come together as one team with a single purpose: to produce the best possible coverage of the event for a global television audience. And whether a producer, a camera operator, sound engineer, or a cable rigger will all be part of the same team. And if we get it right, boy, will we have a party on the final night. And part of me is sad to think that it could be for the last time, because despite the sustainability benefits and the economic arguments, going home for a cuppa with the missus and a good night's sleep, not quite the same. Thank you very much for your time.
Alistair, that was absolutely excellent. Yeah, fantastic presentation. Thank you very much indeed for that. I've got a couple of thoughts for you, and maybe you could just point me in the direction. And I guess it sort of comes towards your final slide, because you will remember back in the day when it all changed, when Sky started entering the market and moving away from the old means of transmission, and then we move in with satellite transmission, and then cable came on the scene. So there's been a constant change in the way that we broadcast signals. And in some respects, what we've got now is just another way of doing it, sports being delivered in a different way. Do you think there's something more fundamental about this, in the sense of now it's almost like we've turned the whole industry on its head, and the people that were formerly your partners might now become your competitors?
I think there's a sense of that, yes, and I think there's been almost a homogenization of the industry, if you could call it that. I'm sorry, the word homogenization has caused Les to fall off his seat.
Yeah, absolutely, it would do.
But yes, there are, I mean, in the sports industry, there are people who, dealing are rights brokers on the one side and technologists on the other side, and production companies and broadcasters. And yes, are they all becoming one and the same thing? To a degree, yes. And the middle ground is getting very, very busy. But I think the future really will be determined by who has the ability and the world quickest and cheapest. And if you can stay home doing it, so much the better.
But of course, it also comes down to the people involved as well. And as you said at the end, the camaraderie that you've got with everybody involved being there, really making it happen. And of course, as soon as you take that out, it's a different feel altogether, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this year, the last couple of years has been very, very different for the sports events that have taken place. People will know, and people who've been involved with them will understand that, we've all operated in bubbles, and you go to the venue, you do your job, you go back to room service, and you stay in a hotel room and you don't see anybody, and it kind of brings it home why a lot of people are out on the road. And there's no doubt that some people have made life-changing decisions during this time in all sorts of industries, but in our industry, I think some people have looked at themselves and think, actually, do I really want to do all this travel? Do I want to do it? Because if the fun's gone out of it, why am I doing it?
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much indeed, Alistair. I'm sure we'll come back with some more questions at the end. I'd like now, if I may, to move on to Justin Page, who's the CEO for Edge 10. Justin was formerly a lawyer, but is an entrepreneur now with a background in sports marketing. Edge 10, as we're going to hear, is a SaaS business, so right in the heart of technology, and the products are used by all the top sports franchises, people like everything from the Premier League to the NHL, NBA. And interestingly enough, Edge 10 recently won a Sports Tech Award for the best use of technology by clubs, so very relevant indeed. So very much looking forward to this. Justin, over to you.
We've just heard from Alistair, fascinating stuff. I certainly worked in sports for a long time, but certainly didn't know the half of that. And really, what I'm just going to spend 10 minutes on now is perhaps a whole nother area of how the athletes actually get to perform at what we hope is their best, so that Alistair can make sure that we're all getting to watch these events, and they've actually got some people on the pitch, on the field, on the track, able to actually do their stuff. So we're going a little bit back, if you like, in the sporting ecosystem or the food chain to see how that goes. So I'm the CEO of the Edge 10 Group, and what I'm just going to talk a little bit about today is our flagship core product, which is the ARMS platform. So I'll skip through this, other than to say that my passion for this area of sports performance really came about from when I was just finishing up sixth form at school and got into doing some junior representative shooting for my sins, and also some rowing, and really just got into my head at that point very early on. That was sadly for me the 80s, and really got to try and understand better how to make the most out of what I would call regular average talent. That was my teammates, myself, and really understanding performance and how we were performing and how our coaches were getting the best out of us. And that really got my interest in that all through my 20s, until I was able to get into the industry age 25, 26 and start working in it. So that's my personal sort of background to it, but that's how I came to be involved here. So ARMS itself, our description, put very simply, is that we focus on the elite sport, and we are the leading SaaS solution which powers the sports data ecosystem. And what that really means is that we collect and analyze athlete data with the goal of maximizing performance, reducing injuries, and hopefully helping teams and leagues identify talent for the future. We do that. Data can be a little bit of a dry subject at times. So one of our key positionings when we talk to whether it's leagues, whether it's individual teams, Olympic organizations, we really talk about trying to bring their data to life and breathing new life into that data. It can be dry, and really we focus on how do the people connecting with the information really develop a passion for it and use it to inspire the decision making and indeed the athletes' performance themselves. So what does that really mean for us as a product? Give you an example. We've worked now with Major League Baseball for quite some time. It started off in the core of the electronic medical records, collecting medical information about their players on behalf of the league, but for general player health policy benefits and for medico-legal compliance. And to give you a flavour, there are now, I think, over, as you can see there, 33,000 Major League Baseball players who've had their records maintained and kept to a high standard in our platform. Some of the other leagues that we work with, to give you a snapshot, we're very North America focused, where I'm based, but obviously originally from the UK. And really, we're sports agnostic. We're all about understanding the industry that we work in, but it doesn't matter if it's the NHL, National Hockey League, for the ice hockey, CFL is the Canadian Football League, baseball, the ATP Tour, so all men's tennis is all of those guys that you see on tour. Their medical records are captured by the trainers that go on tour with the players and capture that information centrally. And probably won't be a surprise to most of you, it's only a very small number proportionally of the very top players who have their own teams. The vast majority, I think the 80-20 rule, the vast majority of players rely pretty much completely on the ATP Tour provided medical and professional support, and they have to have a standardized platform, because if you're getting treated by a trainer in Melbourne one week and you're treated in London a month later and you're treated in New York a couple of months after that, you can't be traveling around with bits of paper hanging out your bag, which is your medical record. It's got to be standardized and it's got to be available via cloud, so that the practitioner who's treating you knows your history. A few more numbers. We're now up to globally probably about 250,000 different athletes around the world supported by our platform, and we hope to grow that exponentially in the coming years. I was 2 months whether to drop this slide in, but just very, very, very briefly to give you an idea that this is the process that we go through, which is common to many industries actually, but this is our take on it for human performance and athletic performance. We want to centralize that information that's come from disparate sources. We want to make sure that the teams and the practitioners can analyze it clearly, and obviously sometimes using third-party tools like the now ubiquitous Power BI will visualize those outputs and allow the coaches and the players to really make the decisions about the players. So the NBA, actually, to give an example, introduced a concept. We've had it in English football for quite a while, but they introduced a concept of load management recently. So now if you're a fan of the NBA, you will actually be told at times that your favorite player might be LeBron James, except he was just suspended yesterday for starting a fight. But he might be rested from the next game, and the official reason is load management, and that's an official recognized category within the sports EMR and sports performance. Now, in the UK, in England, Scotland, wherever we watch our football, we know that that's sort of been happening. We talk about players being rested. When Cristiano Ronaldo went to Man United, was he rested for a game? Obviously, the now former manager got into hot water because he rested him for a Champions League game or whichever game it was, and then United didn't do well. So we've had the concept around for a few years, but it's never been really codified into a solid practice for the benefit of the player's health. And the NBA now do that. This is just a slide to really give you an example of the disparate data sources that we can bring in, whether medically focused, and some of those you'll see there are available to all of us, Polar, Garmin. That kind of data gets assimilated by our platform. Quick 10 seconds to say, some of you will probably wonder how important security is. It's absolutely vital, and we spend a huge amount of money every year in making sure that we're compliant with all the latest certifications that we need and are following best practice. As this is a technology forum, there'll be no surprises to know that I learned as a non-technologist coming into the industry 10 years ago from the business side of sports, that actually it's still the people that make the difference here rather than the actual technology, and the behavior of our people and the behavior of our team and keeping our data secure is paramount. So what does that really mean for us? Again, you know, in the NHL, in hockey, they're actually our longest standing client going back to 2006. And they were the first league, I think, globally, to my knowledge. There may be one that's fallen off the map somewhere that I'm not aware of, that really brought this focus on a centralized, standardized medical record for players. So we've worked with them for a long time, and they've really been the forefrunner of that, certainly in North America. I won't go into the detail of these slides, but to pick out some topical ones, that medical records includes things like neurocognitive, so concussion. Everyone's seen recently concussion's a big issue for everyone at the moment, so we will collect concussion information and data and head impact assessment injuries. Telehealth, you know, we help leagues manage all the medication that's given to players. So really it's a very long list of items that form part of it. We include mobile. You probably expect in this day and age we have to go mobile. Practitioners expect to be able to do the work on the move. Now that might be practitioners that don't get a lot of sympathy from us, who are sitting on the owner's private jet doing LeBron James's medical record, but they still need easy access to the information and the data. One of our key users in the UK, obviously until recently a Premier League team, AFC Bournemouth, and if there was more time, I'm happy to go into some examples of the kind of stuff they do. The NBA are a recent addition to what we do, and they're really at the forefront of combining all of this medical information with other data sets. You saw me mention on a previous slide that the future for this part of the industry is making sure that the decision makers medically, and indeed the coaches, the managers in football terms, have all the information at their fingertips so that they're able to decide players to play, rest, and how many minutes in a game they might play. The analytics portion of this is key. I think every industry now, you know, Microsoft, all the money they put into Power BI almost proves this point. If you work in the city, you know, everyone has their Bloomberg terminals for 20 odd years now. How we consume the information and how we present it is vital to what we do, as it is in many, many sectors. And that extends to, you know, interacting with the players through the use of a player app. And we're always trying to dedicate more resources to improve what the information the players get and what they get to see. The quick nod to COVID, we couldn't do this. Alistair, I thought you covered that very well. We've got to mention COVID, and we had to, you know, turn on a dime, as they say over here, and really help the leagues monitor their athletes going to facilities, playing in a bubble last year, and we had to really deploy all of our skills and expertise to try and allow them, which we did, to monitor those athletes and make sure that people were actually healthy and fit that are going into facilities and going to train. Where do we think the future is for us, and where are we headed? Machine learning, data science, absolutely key part of what will take more and more time and more resources in our industry. I have no doubt about that. And the use of AI, again, heard about it in broadcast, it's going to get more and more important. I think we're going to have the same issues that Alistair mentioned about to what extent is it the famous coach's gut instinct that makes decisions, and to what extent is it the machine learning and potentially AI that gets used on all of the data that we collect to make decisions about, well, LeBron James should only play 32.5 minutes, not 35 minutes, because the risk of injury goes up exponentially in minute 34 and 35. So there's going to be lots of discussions around that to come, and it's an area that we obviously have to monitor very carefully. We focus a lot on community, so because of the position where we now work with 4 of the 5 major leagues in the US, we're constantly trying to really improve the dialogue across all of the people that we work with across different leagues. The one nice thing about the healthcare portion of what we do is that people are very concerned that, yes, they're in competition, but they also want to share best practice if it's helping the health of the athletes. And look, our people, I have to put that in at the end, just because if there's one thing I learned, it took me about a year and a half when I first got into the industry on the tech side of performance. It's still the people that really matter. And for a long time, that first year and a half, I thought it was all about the product. Of course, the product's important, but certainly in our space, in our sector, If we didn't have a team of really, really experienced practitioners who've been around the block, then the services that we provide to those teams and leagues, we wouldn't have the contracts that we do. That's where we're based. So we're for a small team, we're spread. We have to be where the action is, or at least on similar time zones at least. So thank you very much. Just about within the time limit, Les and Phil, but I hope that was informative.
Justin, that was excellent. Thank you very much for keeping to time, which is always great news, and extremely informative, as you can imagine. I've got one question. There's a couple of others as well. You mentioned about confidentiality. I can imagine with all this data that you collect and hold, that must be an absolute nightmare for your company, or for your clients at least, in terms of holding that data.
I mean, I think it's just something you get used to, in the same way that you know, I guess, wouldn't want to be asked to fly a 787, not having done it before. But once you get used to it, you know, it is just what we do. And as long as we're constantly monitoring those standards and making sure we're adhering to ISO, SOC 2 Type 2 and all the various certifications, then I think we can't afford to let that scare us from doing what is ultimately a really important role. If you don't share the information around the decision makers and around the medical people and the sports scientists, and if you don't share that information, then players are going to suffer at the end of the day, because they're not going to get the best care and the best advice.
Peter Bailey asked a question, which was whether or not there are different types of systems by different sports. And I guess I would align that with a question like, within a sport, if you were working, say, in the Premier League, would everybody working with the same system, or are they different?
So yeah, so if you look at the core, the way it tends to work, keeping the answer brief, is for the core medical information, same way when we go to our GP practice or into hospital, there's an NHS, centralized record. That core medical piece in the United States is standardized. In the rest of the world, it historically has not been. So one of the pieces of dialogue we're having now with the EFL and potentially EPL is to standardize that from a medical health record point of view. So if you switch to England, no, it's not standardized. Chelsea will keep similar but different information on the health of their players. I could tell lots of stories of moving to the bar afterwards about players and their medical records in the old days, 15, 20 years ago. But it really depends on the country and depends on the medico-legal compliance regime.
Right. There is one hand up here. Alistair, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's a very quick one. You clearly have a lot of data I'd love to get my hands on. But to Leslie's point about confidentiality, but can you see a day when the kind of amalgam of that data that you hold, obviously not people's personal data, but some of the trends and everything else that can be publicly shared and would be part of, we're always, every broadcaster around the world is trying to get more data and use the screen for the real estate of a screen to get more information over to public. Can you see a day when that might happen?
Yeah, if you look at the Ryder Cup, and I think, didn't we see, or was it another golf tournament recently where we had the heart rate monitor on one of them, all of them, some of them, in terms of what the heart rate was doing. I think very quickly, for me, it's three buckets, Alistair. There's the bucket you guys already share, what we call game and match statistics, how fast did they run last week, last year. I think that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum that will never be public and used is obviously the actual medical record of turning up to say, I had a migraine headache, or I was sick, or I was, there's going to be certain stuff that's always private. I do think there's going to be a bit of a battle on the middle ground with the Players Association, the players' unions. Who owns that right? I saw a legal case started recently, I think, by a group of English footballers on this very topic. I think there's a middle ground where there's things that probably are not a pure medical record, but they're at the moment considered private or part of a health record or confidential. I think some of that information will see the light of day, like heart rate information that's clearly, you couldn't get that information if the player didn't consent to give it, whether via their club. So I think more of that information will come out, subject to that core private stuff will always be private.
Justin, thank you very much indeed. That's been terrific, very interesting indeed. Third up in our group is something, as you might say, just a little bit different. We've got Jeff Saltman coming in from Barcelona, who is the CEO of Air Race E. Jeff's been bringing the excitement of air racing to the masses for many years, and I know he's widely recognized as one of the world's leading promoters. But at Air Race E, he's pioneering something a little bit different, which is the electric air racing. And I know he's hoping to sort of feed that into the development fully of electric planes. Jeff also sits on the Environmental Commission of the FAI, which is the world's governing body for air sports. Jeff, sounds very exciting. Looking forward to hearing all about it.
Yeah, thank you. All right. As Les said, I am the founder of Air Race E, and I have kind of a history of almost 20 years in the air racing, in the sport of air racing. But the past few years is when we've kind of shifted our focus to electric. Now, the topic of today is obviously around how technology can kind of transform or drive innovation or develop sport and the sport industry and support the sports industry. I'm going to actually approach it from kind of the other direction and talk about how sport can also be a catalyst for driving change and innovation and developing technology as well. And I'm going to do that by talking about electric airplane racing. So we have the first ever electric airplane race in the works, and we've launched it recently. You'll see some racing very soon. I'll come to that. And what it is really we're taking air racing, the sport of air racing, and the whole entire aerospace industry, and really taking it into the future. We're bringing it forward and into the next generation. So we've created a platform, and this is basically it's a technology platform, a hub for the entire industry to really develop its technologies in electric propulsion and e-mobility. And I guess probably most of you, of course, are familiar with Formula E, and more recently Extreme E and E1, which is the electric power boats. And these electric sports are doing great things. And we're doing, I mean, our mission and our objective is effectively the same as theirs, even our business model. So we're just doing that for the aerospace industry. And interestingly, there's a lot of transfer of technology between those segments as well. Ultimately, of course, it is still a sport. It's a thrilling, it's exciting motorsport, and that's how it's all positioned. And to give you a taste of that, I will play a very short clip and give you some image.
So close, this battle between the two of them, just meters between the two planes.
Are you ready to experience the evolution of air racing? Welcome to the world's first all-electric air race, Air Race E. Prepare yourself to witness the exciting future of aviation and motorsport right now. Air Race E is a pioneer leading the charge in the electrification of aerospace. It is the only electric air race series with manned aircraft pushed to their limits in a real-world mission to win. Pure motorsport in 3 dimensions. Aviation is going green, and Air Race E is at the center of the revolution, creating a platform for the industry to move forward and accelerate the technology that will help save our planet. New concepts in electric propulsion and hands-on partnerships with aerospace and automotive leaders allows Air Race E to reshape the e-mobility and transport industry. The spectacular and action-packed competition will see top pilots commanding leading-edge technology racing head-to-head at speeds of up to 400 kilometers per hour around a tight circuit just meters above the ground. The true motorsport for the future by the world's leading air racing organization. Are you ready to meet the future?
It's a dynamic sport, and there's nothing like it in the world.
All right, so hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavor of our sport. And with the video, the images that you saw actually come from our current racing that we do. So we do a sport called Formula One air racing under the brand Air Race One. And it's combustion engines, so it's conventional motors. And we've been racing around the world and racing for many, many decades, actually. What we're doing is we're keeping the same format of the race. So basically the same formula of rules, except, of course, changing it for the electric propulsion. The only other difference is, as you can see on the screen here, is we're taking the race from 8 laps to 4 laps for obviously endurance issues. It's important to note here that our sport is 8 airplanes all taking off from the runway together, racing around. In this case, electric racing is 4 laps, and the first one to cross the finish line is a winner. So it's real competitive motorsport. And as you all will be aware, of course, motorsport itself has historically been used to advance technology. It's always been a platform in automotive and motorcycles and just about every other format. And air racing is no exception. It's no different. Air racing has actually been around for over 100 years. And there have been really, really interesting case studies in the past about how technology has transferred from aerospace into the market. From the sports, from air racing into aerospace. Kind of a great example of that is the Spitfire. Of course, one of the most famous warbirds of all time, successful aircraft in World War II, was actually an air racing plane. It was actually built for the Schneider Trophy, and it was built to race in the 20s and 30s, and was repurposed later for technology and for combat. So basically, that's exactly what we're doing, but we're doing that with electrification for the next generation. We've got a really exciting motorsport already existing with Air Race 1 in the sport called Formula 1 Air Racing. But what we wanted to do was do something that's really meaningful and important for the industry, for the technology to be able to advance and take us into that future. So that's really what we kind of do everything with that in mind as we develop this sport. But it's also important that it be an exciting motorsport because we need to engage audiences. There's no point in having electric airplanes if nobody wants to fly them or is unsure about their safety, etc. So what we're really trying to do is showcase the technology to audiences and engage with them and make it accessible so that they'll be those adopters of the technology when it hits the market. Now, we're not just a standalone sport. We obviously have many stakeholders. The aerospace industry is obviously one of them. E-mobility is another, generally, and of course the whole sustainable industry. But it's also cities, it's also airports, of course, and educational institutions. So it's really across the board. We have applications for what we do, where we can introduce the applications of technology. And this has been validated by our partners that have come on board. So we've had, as you can see, all of these different stakeholders involved in the sport. Notably Airbus that came on board as a founding partner. They've been along with us our ride for a couple of years now, a few years. And ANSYS, as a simulation software, has been adapting its technologies for our teams to be building. University of Nottingham and a lot of other engineering companies. So here we have 3 classes of race. I won't get into these, but we've basically got 2 airplane classes. And I only wanted to mention that we have an eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing class as well. That's a really hot topic in aerospace. Even the theme of the day is to call out ANSYS in particular as an example of how information technology and software has really transformed our sport, and we depend completely on it to take our sport forward. The technology coming into our sport in the form, in this case, of simulation software and modeling is completely new. The teams have typically not had the resources or the necessity to use this technology before. And what we're doing is by entering into electrification, there's a lot more unknown, a lot more at stake, and we need a lot more collaboration and a lot more insight into what we do. So we can't depend on all the historical knowledge that we have. So we've been using modeling systems to help these teams advance. Plane on the top right corner is our Norwegian team, and they're actually going to be flying in the next week or so. We're just waiting on the document from the Civil Aviation Authority. And that's going to be the first ever electric race plane to fly in history. So that's going to be a very big moment. And we have other prototypes in work, other teams building. This one, for example, is the University of Nottingham, has a project with us where they're converting also a race plane into an electric race plane. And what's exciting here is, of course, they can take this plane and use it for students, for other partners, for other projects that they're working on, and other technologies that they're developing in the university can all be applied to this project. So we're seeing a real convergence of things. But this is just very quick to just leave you on with a sort of a feel about what we're doing. This, by the way, this plane here is also the Dutch team based on their model. And yeah, these are just a few kind of comments from some of our partners. But I'll leave it there and hand it back to Les. And thank you very much for your time and your patience.
Jeff, thank you very much indeed. It's interesting because we've seen in Formula E, Formula One and then now Formula E, and that move, which has clearly been quite successful in terms of how that's happened. But from what I understand, you're doing something quite unusual here. So you're taking the existing plane, taking the old engine out, and then refitting it with electric motors. Is that correct? I mean, I would have thought there was sort of problems with the weight balance and everything else of the aircraft.
So it is correct. We're also doing a couple of other things in parallel. So we are starting with the existing race planes and sort of retrofitting them for electric propulsion, because we're trying to see what the same sort of weight and performance characteristics, how it can be optimized for electric. However, interestingly, we were actually just a week or so ago, started the process of building our own aircraft in-house as well. So we've got teams working around the world, working to a formula, and we're building our own class. And it's yet to be determined, it'll be determined as we design, whether or not we retrofit or we build a ground-up design. I should note that some of our teams, a couple slides back, there was a kind of a white plane in a hangar. Yeah. That is actually a ground-up design. That's not a retrofit. That's a Swiss team, and they're building completely from scratch the entire aircraft. So it is possible. We do allow in the rules for teams to do that. It's just very ambitious at an early stage of a sport.
And have you had to introduce lots of new regulations to do this?
Yeah, well, interestingly, it's not only us, it's governments have to actually initiate regulations. I mean, they have to institute rules and procedures for even just the certification. So it's very, very challenging even to be allowed to fly because the governments haven't caught up with this technology. So you'll see examples of these flying, but they work on a very, very bespoke one-off case with the CAA. There aren't regulations in most areas that govern this. So that does add a huge layer of complexity, which other sports and automotive and other means of transportation wouldn't have to face because we need permission even just to get into the air. We can't go to a racetrack and kind of test something out with no one around. If it's going to get airborne, even taxi, it needs permission. So. And
I've just got, it's a kind of like the dim question, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. In the same way that you find with, say, an electric car, it's completely silent, have we got the same issue with electric planes? Or is it less so because of the movement of the air and so on?
Well, so yeah, that is actually a very good question because most people assume it's silent because automotive is virtually silent. No, actually, in the case of specifically in the case of propeller-driven aircraft, piston-driven aircraft, the propeller actually makes most of the noise anyways. Right. So it kind of breaks the sound barrier as it goes around. So a lot of the noise does come from the propeller, but it will be less noisy. And it's really important, though, regardless of what noise the race planes do or don't make, it's a very, very important issue to the aerospace industry because noise abatement procedures and keeping, even being able to operate throughout, all night long while people are sleeping, these are huge, huge, huge issues which electrification can actually resolve. So that's a real big ambition, just as much as, the environment and efficiency is to the aerospace industry is noise reduction.
Well, it's certainly a very opportune time to be involved in this. There's no doubt about it, Jeff. And with all the things that are going on at the moment, I'm sure it's going to become a great success. And thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us. I'm sure we'll have some more questions as we go on. Thanks for your time. And last but not least, Mike Mortimer, who is CEO for a company called Podium Zone. Mike is a design engineer, and I know he's a keen lover of action sports, so things like mountain biking and snowboarding. But I know he had a lot of frustrations, and as a result, quite often, necessity is the mother of invention. So he formed Podium Zone in 2018 with several views in mind, which were including connecting action sports communities, finding the venues and events, and also assisting with performance measurement, something that is not quite on the scale of where Justin was going, but I think it's in that sort of category. So Mike, we're looking forward to hearing all about it from you.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Mike, I'm the founder and CEO of Podium. As Les mentioned, the reason I founded Podium was because I was frustrated that action sports experiences in general are not easily accessible, right? So if you want to go skiing, you want to go mountain biking, fishing, whatever it is, consumers will lose between 1 to 8 hours researching parks, getting tickets, scheduling coaching, hiring gear, locating services, and queuing up. And obviously the expectation today is to have things with a couple of taps in an app. But the same applies on the business side as well. Action sports services are very inefficient to operate. You've got to take payments, you've got to acquire legal waivers, manage bookings, verify tickets, find new customers. And we find that action sports businesses are losing up to 60% of their time every day operating their services. So we fix these problems. For consumers, what we do is we reduce that 1 to 8 painful hours of finding all the services in this ecosystem to get this complete action sports experience, and reduce that to a couple of taps in the app, which costs you about 5 minutes. For businesses, what we do is we take all of that manual process management away. And we did a survey with our pilot mountain biking facilities in the UK, and we found that we're saving them up to 60% of their time every day by using Podium. And actually our largest bike park, we helped double their revenue last year by being on the platform. But that's a bit about Podium, but really what I wanted to discuss today was explore today was the opportunities that the sports industry has in the future. And I've got a couple of questions as I go through for Alistair and Jeff specifically as part of my presentation. So where is the sports industry heading? So today, our experiences are slow and dictated. Tomorrow, they will be fast and self-serve. And in the future, they will be instant and consumer curated. So let's run through a couple of examples. So for facilities and stadiums, things are painfully slow today. This is a US ski resort on the left. Queuing is not acceptable to consumers anymore. The US resorts recognize this, and Altera Mountain Co, as an example, has committed $30 million to digital technology to resolving issues like these. Tomorrow, and what we have, well, today as well, is Hubster, right, which is finding success in offering self-serve sports equipment hubs, which make it painless to perform these outdoor sports without the burden of queuing up and bringing your own gear. But in the future, facilities and stadiums will be largely unmanned with digital security, touchless transactions, and robots serving fans. And this has to happen because 44% know someone who will quit for remote working. There is obviously a monumental shift to remote working now, and facilities and stadiums, if they're to succeed, they have to solve this labor challenge, and it obviously will be solved with technology. This could be making a smaller pool of employees more efficient, or moving customer service staff remotely with things such as video kiosks. In the media and the broadcast world, today we have Formula One, right? And we have 2D camera angles that are dictated by Formula One, the broadcaster. And now tomorrow we're going to have Next VR, who already bring 3D perspectives and interactive perspectives of basketball to sports consumers. But the question for me is, and the question for Alistair is, why, as a consumer, can't I control my own camera and fully curate my own sports viewing experience? The technology already exists today. So DroneUt is an example of this. right? They make a hand-sized drone. It's designed for GPS-denied areas, and it's safe around people because it doesn't expose the rotors. And I can tell you, I would pay good money to control my own camera to, say, track a specific football player or monitor a specific corner in a Formula One race. Okay, so yeah, onto the fan engagement piece. So today we engage with athletes and the sports itself via social platforms like Instagram, right? And that doesn't really get me that close to the athlete. It doesn't really get me that close to the action. And then we have companies like SportsBuff, headquartered in the UK, I believe. I don't know if they're still headquartered here, but they get fans participating in live sports with surveys and chat. But fans want to be as close to the action and the athletes as possible, and gaming could be the answer to this. So if we look at the F1 esports series, where F1 fans play the Formula One game on PlayStation, PC, Xbox, that series is serious now, right? It generates 11 million live stream views. And of course, these viewers are transferred over to Formula One, the actual live sport itself. It's a really important angle for Formula One there in the gaming sector. And if you look at the statistics on the number of video gamers worldwide, there is a staggering 1 billion additional gamers projected for 2023 compared to 2015 by Statista. So the question is, why can't I play a video game using virtual reality and race side by side with Lewis Hamilton in a live Grand Prix? Once again, the technology is pretty much there. Gaming presents a serious opportunity for fan engagement in live sports. And just a question to Jeff here, you know, we've got the Air Race E and it sounds fantastic. And we've got platforms like new, you know, bleeding edge platforms now, like Microsoft's Flight Simulator. And they already have the Reno Air Race in that platform. And that's got me interested personally in the Reno Air Races, right? And so, you know, are you partnering with gaming platforms to increase the visibility of your sport, increase that fan engagement and that fan participation, right? That is clearly a way for Formula One to drive viewership. So for me, my perspective on the future of sports is that, one, it's going to be consumer curated, right? With viewers and participants curating the exact experience that they want for themselves. At Podium, we do this already by bringing an ecosystem of action sports services together, like parks, coaches, renters, and vendors. And we enable consumers to select and curate the experience from that wide array of vendors in an app. The future of sports is going to be instantly accessible. Consumers expect things within seconds now, not minutes, and certainly not hours. This will affect facilities and stadiums the most. Once again, at Podium, we're providing instant access to action sports with a couple of taps in an app, providing an Uber-like experience. And finally, fan engagement. Fans want to be within touching distance of athletes and the action. And as Les alluded to, we are addressing this with gamification on the mountain, enabling mountain bikers, skiers, surfers to engage with each other from anywhere in their world in a gamification format. Yeah, so that's me.
Well, that's fantastic, gentlemen. Alistair, Justin, Jeff, and Mike, I really appreciate all your time and effort. You put some great presentations together there. Really enjoyed the discussion with you. And so thanks very much indeed for that.